The sun was barely above the wheat fields when I drove toward the old farmhouse to collect a debt that was supposed to ruin a family. I had done this kind of work for years, knocking on doors with papers in my hand and coldness in my chest, but that morning, before I even stepped out of my truck, I saw a woman standing in the yard with dirt on her hands, tears in her eyes, and a courage that made me feel smaller than any man I had ever been. Before the story begins, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Diaries if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the kind of mercy that can change a broken life forever. My name was Armin Vale, and people in 3 counties knew me as the man who came when promises were broken. I did not lend the money myself, but I collected it for those who did. I worked for a finance office in town that gave loans to desperate farmers, small shopkeepers, and men who thought one good season would fix everything. Most of them did not understand the papers they signed. Most of them believed rain would come on time, crops would sell high, illness would stay away, and life would be fair. Life was rarely fair. That was where I entered. I arrived with notices, deadlines, warnings, and sometimes the final paper that meant machinery, land, or livestock would be taken. I told myself I was only doing a job. I told myself debts had to be paid. I told myself kindness did not keep food on my own table. But deep inside, there was a part of me I had buried years ago, a part that still remembered what it felt like to be poor and afraid. The farm belonged to a man named Caspian Rowe, though everyone called him Cass. His file was thick, full of missed payments, extensions, late fees, and notes written by clerks who had never seen a dry field in their lives. He had borrowed money for seed, then borrowed more when his tractor broke, then borrowed again when his youngest boy fell sick and needed treatment in the city. The office wanted their money now. Not next month. Not after harvest. That morning, I had been sent to collect either a full payment or sign surrender of the small herd, the tractor, and the east field. In plain words, I was sent to take the heart out of that farm. It was a bright day, the kind of day that should have felt peaceful. The fields rolled gold under the sun, and a soft wind moved through them like a hand smoothing a blanket. There were hens near the porch, a rusty water pump beside the barn, and rows of laundry trembling on a line. But the beauty of the place only made the sadness sharper. The house looked tired. The paint peeled around the windows. One side of the roof had been patched with mismatched tin. Near the barn, 2 children stood close together, watching me from behind an old wooden gate. The older one, a girl with serious eyes, held the hand of a smaller boy whose thin shoulders made him look younger than he probably was. Then I saw her. Maribel Rowe stepped out from behind the barn carrying a bucket of feed. She was not dressed like someone waiting to beg. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her hair was tied back with a faded scarf, and her boots were covered in mud. She looked exhausted, but not defeated. When she saw the truck, she stopped for only a second. Then she set the bucket down, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked toward me as if she had known this moment was coming for a long time. I expected anger. I expected pleading. I expected excuses about weather, hospitals, broken equipment, dishonest buyers, and the cruel cost of survival. Instead, she looked at the envelope in my hand and said quietly that her husband was not home. Cass had left before dawn to find day work 2 towns over. He had taken nothing but a lunch wrapped in cloth and the shame of knowing a stranger would come to his door while he was gone. Her voice did not shake when she told me this, but her eyes did. I told her I had authority to speak with her because her name was on the loan too. She nodded once, like she had already read the sentence before I spoke it. We stood in the yard with the morning sun between us, and I explained what would happen if no payment was made. I used the same words I always used. Legal action. Asset recovery. Final notice. Deadline. Each word sounded colder in the open air. The children were still watching, and Maribel glanced at them only once, but that glance held everything. Fear, apology, love, and a mother's silent promise that she would not let the world crush them while she still had breath in her body. Then she made her offer. She said she did not have the money, but she had a field of wheat ready to harvest, a barn full of work, and 2 hands that had never refused labor. She asked me to give her 1 day. Not 1 month, not another extension on paper, not mercy that would cost me my job. Just 1 day. She said if I helped her bring in the wheat before the storm forecast for that night, she could sell enough grain to make a real payment by morning. If the storm came before harvest, the crop would flatten, the grain would spoil, and the debt would become a grave instead of a burden. She looked at me and said that I had come to collect what her husband owed, but maybe what was owed could be saved instead of seized. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. I was wearing office shoes. My shirt was clean. My truck had air conditioning and a clipboard on the seat. I was not a farmer anymore. I had spent 15 years pretending I had never been one. I told her I could not spend the day working her fields. She asked me if taking the tractor would be easier than helping save the harvest it was built for. That sentence hit me harder than it should have. For a moment, I saw my own mother standing in a doorway years ago, watching men carry away my father's tools after our land failed. I remembered how one of them would not meet her eyes. I remembered deciding I would never be the helpless one again. Somehow, without noticing, I had become the man at the door. I looked toward the sky. Clouds were gathering far beyond the ridge, darker than they should have been so early. The weather report had been right. Rain was coming. Maribel's offer was desperate, but it was not foolish. The wheat needed hours, not days. The farm had an old harvester, but Cass had taken the truck, and Maribel could not manage the machine, the grain carts, the children, and the buyers alone. I should have handed her the notice and left. Instead, I loosened my tie, took off my jacket, and asked where she needed me. The day changed after that. Not suddenly, not like a miracle, but like a locked door slowly opening. Maribel led me to the machine shed, where an aging combine sat under dust and hope. I climbed into it with memories waking in my hands. The controls were different from the ones my father had used, but the rhythm came back. The engine coughed, roared, and then settled into a rough growl. Maribel stood below, shielding her eyes from the sun, and for the first time that morning, I saw something like belief cross her face. We worked through the heat. The wheat fell in golden waves, and dust filled the air until my throat burned. Maribel moved like someone who had no permission to be tired. She drove the grain cart, checked sacks, brought water, calmed the children, fixed a jammed belt with a wrench and a prayer, and never once asked me to pity her. Around noon, the little boy brought me a tin cup of water with both hands. His name was Oren, and he told me the wheat looked like sunshine when it poured. His sister, Sela, corrected him and said sunshine did not pay bills. She was too young to sound that old. By afternoon, my clean shirt was stained with sweat and dust. My palms had blistered. My back ached. But something inside me felt strangely lighter. Every row we finished became a line between ruin and survival. Every load of grain became proof that not all debts were settled with punishment. Maribel did not speak much while we worked, but when she did, her words stayed with me. She told me Cass was not a bad man. He was a proud man who had been bent by too many bad seasons. She told me he had stopped sleeping, stopped laughing, stopped sitting at the table with the children because he believed he had failed them. She said debt did not only take land, it took the sound out of a house. Late in the day, Cass returned. He came walking up the road with his lunch cloth empty in one hand and his shoulders heavy with defeat. When he saw my truck in the yard and the combine moving through his field, he froze. For a second, I thought he would shout. Maybe he wanted to. Maybe pride rose in him like fire. But then he saw Maribel standing on the cart, hair loose from her scarf, face streaked with dust, waving him over with both arms. He saw the harvested rows. He saw grain piled where there had almost been loss. His knees seemed to weaken. He walked into the field slowly, and when Maribel climbed down, he held her like a man holding the last piece of his world. I looked away because some moments are too private for strangers, even strangers who helped create them. But I heard Cass crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the broken sound of a man who had carried shame so long he had forgotten how to set it down. Maribel held his face in both hands and told him they were not finished yet. There was still daylight. There was still wheat standing. There was still a chance. So we worked together. Cass took over the machine when my arms began to tremble. I drove the cart. Maribel loaded and tied sacks. Even the children helped by carrying water and gathering tools. The sky darkened. Thunder rolled behind the hills. The wind grew sharp and restless. But the field kept shrinking. The last strips of wheat stood trembling as if they knew the storm was coming for them. We raced the clouds with everything we had. The first drops fell just as the final load reached the barn. For a moment, no one moved. Rain struck the tin roof, soft at first, then harder, until the whole world sounded like applause. Cass stood beside the grain, soaked and shaking. Maribel leaned against the barn door, breathing hard. The children danced in the rain because children can find joy even beside disaster. And I stood there with mud on my trousers and wheat dust in my hair, holding the final notice in my pocket like it belonged to another man. That night, Maribel cooked what little they had. Beans, bread, onions, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I sat at their table because they insisted, though I felt unworthy of the chair. Cass tried to apologize for the debt, but I stopped him. I told him I had seen men with money who owed more to the world than he ever would. He looked at me like he did not understand, and maybe I did not fully understand either. All I knew was that something in me had shifted. The debt was still real. The office was still waiting. But for the first time in years, I did not see a file. I saw a family. The next morning, I went with Cass to the grain buyer. The payment was not enough to clear everything, but it was enough to stop the seizure. It was enough to prove effort, enough to force the office to restructure the loan, enough to buy time. My manager was furious when I returned without signatures for surrender. He accused me of becoming soft. He said softness was dangerous in our line of work. I told him maybe cruelty was more expensive than patience. He threatened my job. I told him I had already lost worse things than a job by forgetting where I came from. In the weeks that followed, I helped Cass negotiate a fairer plan. I connected him with a cooperative that bought grain directly. I found a mechanic willing to repair the tractor for payments instead of cash up front. I did not become a saint. I did not fix the whole world. But I stopped pretending the rules were holy just because they were printed on paper. Sometimes a man's life changes not because someone gives him everything, but because someone refuses to take the last thing he has. Months later, I returned to the Rowe farm on a bright morning, not with notices, but with a box of spare parts in my truck. The house still looked tired, but there was laughter coming from the yard. Sella was chasing Oren between the chickens, and Cass was mending a fence with a steadier look in his eyes. Maribel came out carrying a basket of fresh bread. She smiled when she saw me, not like a woman greeting a debt collector, but like someone greeting a witness to a miracle that had been built by sweat instead of magic. Near the end of that season, the farm made its first full payment on time. It was not a grand victory to the world. No newspaper wrote about it. No rich man noticed. But for that family, it was everything. It meant the east field stayed theirs. It meant the tractor stayed in the barn. It meant 2 children could sleep without hearing their parents whisper about losing home. And for me, it meant the boy I used to be had not completely disappeared. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach people who still believe that compassion can turn a hopeless day into the beginning of a new life. Special request: comment kindness can save a home if you believe one act of mercy can change someone's entire future. I came to that farm to collect a debt. I thought Maribel Rowe would beg, cry, or curse my name. Instead, she offered me work, truth, and a chance to remember my own humanity. Her husband owed money, yes, but that day taught me something no contract ever could. People are more than their worst season. A field can look ruined before harvest. A man can look heartless before he remembers pain. And sometimes, under a bright daytime sky with storm clouds coming fast, the greatest payment anyone can make is choosing mercy when the world expects you to choose power.